Chapter 4. The Hairdresser. State your name. The third man to enter was curious about the situation already. Once the demonstration ended, all 5 men were escorted out of the demonstration room single file. They all had to sit in a hallway outside of the demonstration room where the well-dressed man, who had randomly selected them, was standing. One by one they were called into this closet of a room for their question segment, and while they waited, they were politely instructed to not talk to one another. Like everyone else, the hairdresser assumed the questions would regard how they individually felt about the product based on their first impressions. That's exactly what they would want, individual responses. If the 5 men talked amongst themselves, the topic would naturally be their thoughts about the product demonstrated, and they would be free to tamper with one another's individual feelings on the subject. Someone who thought the product was impressive at first glance might be convinced it was worthless by someone who loathed it, or vice versa. For the interest of clear data based on initial response, the people in charge of this study would want opinions as unaltered as possible. They could work out the averages themselves. If all 5 people would come in giving same consensus, it would be a watered-down waste of time compared to fresh personal accounts. "Stephen Byrne," replied the hairdresser with a slight lisp. He'd worked at the mall for several years and never noticed this area behind the food court before. His best guess as to its practical function was that suspected shoplifters were detained and or questioned here by mall security. Surely mini-surveys on new products like this didn't happen all year long. If they did, this was the first he'd heard of it, let alone been approached to participate. He just finished eating in the food court after work at the mall salon. A tall man in a black dress shirt and silver tie politely approached him with the offer. Stephen sat awaiting his next question now, grinning as he recalled his reply to the man's initial offer. He said something to the tune of having better offers than $50 from better-looking men before laughing and accepting the nice bonus for an extended day of work. "What did you see, starting from when the door opened in the demonstration room?" The voice on the intercom was reluctant to change the vagueness of the first question from what the first 2 subjects were asked, but it was clear after them that the initial question was too vague and would need more clarity anyway. In the interest of time and reduced confusion, it was best to make the change. Middle school and high school teachers with several of the same classes per day do this often. They want consistent learning in each class, but they learn that the students need certain things better each time, so by the end of the day, the last class sometimes gets a very different lesson than what the first class got. Stephen was more clear than the first 2 subjects as what was being asked on how to answer, but he was equally curious regarding the nature of the question. "Well, this woman walked in with a black skirt and a white blouse. She was a blonde trying real hard to be a brunette." Stephen grinned as he recalled the hint of the woman's roots rising from her scalp. They seemed to scream at him from his seat at the table, but the other men barely noticed, and if they did, they didn't make much note of it. She put the box down and pulled out some wood, nails, vegetables, and she took this peculiar tool out from her box and started pounding in nails with it right there on the table. She didn't explain much about what on earth she was doing, and I don't remember what she called the thing, but it looked very sleek. It shined like platinum all over. Stephen was gazing off in the distance as he continued. He almost forgot he was answering a question as his mind played back the events of only a short while ago. In so little time, so much other information had been presented to his fragile human brain. He'd had time to examine the patterns on the floor, the color of the walls, the bodies of the men in the hallway, and their moods that stood out so clearly from their body language. So much of the communication humans have between one another is nonverbal. We shout at one another with our subtle, inadvertent actions, but most people are too busy listening to each other's words to hear the words of each other's bodies. Stephen always had a knack for reading body language. His attention to details between the demonstration and now wrought havoc on his short-term memory, though. The events of the demonstration room lingered in his mind like flashcards more than a streaming video. The roots of the woman's hair, the shininess of the tool, the bright colors of the vegetables. It wasn't long ago, but most of it seemed so trivial to him that he wasn't committing it to memory. His mind wasn't asked to recall the information, and he expected to just give an opinion on it. This was worse than reviewing flashcards of snapshots. It was as if those flashcards had been crumpled up and discarded while he was studying for another test. Now, his mind struggled to iron out the wrinkles and recite the materials, including the certain details that no longer existed. Stephen's mind was a sprinter and was being asked to perform a half-marathon. "What happened with those things? What were they used for?" Mildly distracted by several flecks of dust drifting through the beam of the ceiling light, Stephen continued. She took out a zucchini and a tomato, and she chopped them both up. She had cute pink nail polish, but it didn't match her bright red lipstick." Stephen scoffed at the fashion mishap, though he realized he was on a bit of a tangent. "She cleaned off the tool and threw it at the poor man on the edge of the row. I thought he was going to scream, but he caught it and laughed. They passed it around to the other guys. They all seemed pretty impressed by how light it was. I'm not sure how light a hammer's supposed to be, but I don't see how throwing a light hammer is any more friendly than throwing a heavy one. She's lucky she didn't throw that thing at me. Stephen rolled his eyes with a bit of dramatic flair that his friends knew and loved him for. "Is that all, Mr. Byrne?" the intercom asked with a curt voice. "Well, yeah, that's about it. She put all her stuff back in the box and left." Stephen folded his arms across his chest and stared at the speaker of the intercom with a hint of attitude as if the box could feel his personality through some firm body language of his own. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Byrne. A man will be waiting for you with your stipend outside." Stephen's eyebrows raised at the briefness of the questions. His expression seemed as if a blind date had just walked out on him after paying the check.